Hey y'all, I'm going to talk a little bit today about two more speeches from the Symposium. The speech of Eryximachus and then the speech of Aristophanes. So the speech of Eryximachus picks up after Pausanias' speech. Remember, Pausanias' speech was distinguishing between heavenly love and common love. And heavenly love is basically, obviously, better than sort of the common form of love. And this is the sort of love that's better because it benefits the city more, right? Pausanias is concerned about the effect of love really on the city or the society as a whole more so than for individual people. Eryximachus is also going to sort of continue in this vein, except he's going to talk about the positive effects of love on a whole wide range of human endeavor: poetry, farming, medicine, physical education. So what's happening is love is being stretched in terms of how it's thought of. And in the first speech, right, it was just really thought about in terms of the relationship between the person and the beloved, but by now it's become sort of more abstract, right? That love is almost just this source of attraction in Eryximachus' speech that has very little to do with like actual human feeling. And I think that's in part what Plato wants us to get at in this speech, and why it's somewhat dissatisfying, because it's so far removed from actual human feeling that it seems as if whatever it is he's talking about, we could just call, we could call it magnetism instead of love if we wanted to. This speech is followed by the speech of Aristophanes, which is one of the most famous speeches in this text. Probably the only speech that'd be more famous than Aristophanes' speech would be the speech of Socrates, which we'll get to in class. There needs to be a little bit of background, because it's very curious that Aristophanes shows up in this text at all, and that he shows up as kind of friendly with Socrates. Because Aristophanes is famous as a poet in his own right in ancient Greece. Like you could go on Amazon and order the complete works of Aristophanes and read his plays. And he generally wrote comedies, and perhaps his most famous comedy is a text called The Clouds. And The Clouds is kind of this slapstick comedy about this weird old guy who runs a school. And his school is really sort of half-baked and full of half-baked ideas, but it has negative consequences on its students. The school corrupts the students, and it's fairly funny how Aristophanes sets up the corruption of the students by the school. And the headmaster of the school, the person who founded it and runs it, is Socrates. So Socrates is kind of this comic villain in Aristophanes' play. And when Socrates, many years later, goes on trial for corrupting the youth, he specifically references Aristophanes in his play as one of the reasons why he has such a bad reputation. So it's often sort of thought that Aristophanes, what Plato has in mind when Plato references the quarrel between philosophy and poetry. That philosophy and poetry have this quarrel or this debate, this disagreement, and they can't really get along. One reason why might be that it seems that the poet, Aristophanes, was responsible, at least in part, for the trial of the philosopher Socrates. But there's even something deeper than that there. There's a deeper quarrel than just the historical accident of Socrates and Aristophanes and Socrates' trial. And the deeper quarrel is that the poet claims to impart wisdom. So the poet, taken in the broad sense, we might say, like the artist, right? Whether it's the whether they're a musician, whether they are writing plays like Aristophanes, or poems or novels or whatever, they claim that their work imparts wisdom. But philosophy, or the philosopher, claims that their work is a source of wisdom. And so there's a sense in which they're fighting for the same turf, right? They're both making claims to illuminate the deepest questions of human life, but through very different methods. The philosopher does it through argument and analysis and those sorts of things, while the poet does it through stories and images and characters. And so we have these two very different ways of proceeding, but they're trying to claim the same territory, and that's also part of the quarrel, which for students of Plato, if you really dig into it, which unfortunately we won't be able to, dig into it too much, but it's worth thinking about that quarrel that I've been talking about and Plato's decision to write in dialogue format. Is this Plato trying to absorb the territory of the poet? Interesting questions to ask about Plato's dialogue format in light of the quarrel between philosophy and poetry. But Aristophanes is here, and he had the hiccups, and now he's going to give his famous speech. And his speech is famous for a couple of reasons, and he proceeds like a poet by telling a story. And he tells this story of human nature and how it has changed over time. And he says that a long time ago, right, he says the human being was completely round. Now, these round human beings, they were basically like two humans glued to each other. So, like, here's one human, here's another, and they're like glued together like that. Got to be too powerful. So Zeus, or one of the gods, broke us all in half. Right? So now there's like two separate individuals where there used to be one. And the sort of the moral of Aristophanes' story is that we are now going around looking for our other half. Right? We used to be like this. Zeus got mad, broke us apart. Now we're like this. And we're going around now looking for our other half. And that, there were all sorts of mixtures, so that when we were glued together, some of us were glued together like male to male, some of us were glued together female to female, some of us were glued together male to female. And so this accounts for, according to Aristophanes, the different orientations, because as we go around, we're looking for our other half. And a lot of the cliches that people use of I'm looking for my other half, my soulmate, and all of that stuff is ultimately derived from Aristophanes' story, right? And so we're going around, right, looking for our other halves, and Aristophanes says, this is at 191d, says, "This then is the source of our desire to love each other. Love is born into every human being. It calls back the halves of our original nature together, and it tries to make one out of two and heal the wound of human nature." And this is an important point for Aristophanes. Like, Euryctomachus' speech had already sort of referenced like the healing power of love, but Aristophanes' speech takes it a little farther by explaining firstly the wound, which is having been sort of violently separated from ourselves by Zeus, and that love then is sort of a healing that brings us back together. And so Aristophanes continues that to ultimately say, like, what love is really about is, as he puts it at 193a, our pursuit of wholeness and a desire to be complete. It's not ultimately for Aristophanes about, physical desire or pleasure or anything like that, but this sort of deeper, you might say, like, metaphysical desire to be whole or complete. And that this is sort of, in its own weird way, given what I said about the quarrel between philosophy and poetry, this is preparing a theme that's going to be present and developed in Socrates' speech when we finally get to that. This sort of metaphysical desire that's rooted in love. So the interesting thing about Aristophanes' speech is it's kind of a turning point in the text, right? And the other speeches that we saw about love were basically like political in nature, right? Then Euryximachus, the doctor, sort of expands it a little bit, but still kind of, I'd say kind of like stupid and uninteresting. But with Aristophanes, he weaves into his speech about love, he weaves in a story about human nature, and where ultimately for Aristophanes, human nature is wounded, right, by that violent separation that Zeus accomplished, and human nature is wounded, and love is sort of the healing of human nature. And the desire for love and the desires that love produces are ultimately directed towards that healing. Aristophanes winds down his speech, and the next speech that will be given by Agathon, but we will talk about that on another time.